Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 162, and we are returning to confirmed land where Noadon has been. We have returned to Roshar with Stormlight Current, episode number 4. Elliot and Paul, we are taking a quick break. We will be back to Mistborn next week. We'll be starting the Well of Ascension. And we'll be doing the entirety of part 1 in next week's episode to kick off Well of Ascension. Paul, how are you?
Fantastic. I'm really excited to talk about this chapter with y'all. Every time not every time. I heard a mention that there was a new, Stormlight 5 chapter that was released. And I was like, okay, one chapter. We're really going to do a whole episode on one chapter of a Stormlight 5 book. And then I started reading the chapter and I was like, oh, okay. I mean, this seems okay. It was a short chapter. And I was like, okay, it might not be that much. And then I really started to read it. Then I read it about halfway through. I was like, okay, we could probably talk for 2 hours at least on this chapter if we wanted to. If we wanted to really just go through it, we could go for a long time. So I'm excited. I'm really excited to talk about this with y'all, and really pick it apart.
Elliot, how are you?
I'm doing great. This chapter we just read reminded me yet again. Probably said this on one of our Stormlight check-in episodes already. I'm gonna have to do some serious homework before we start Stormlight 5. Like this is gonna be the series closer with all the references, tying up the loose ends, at least most of them. I'm gonna need to go back and refresh myself on a lot if I'm gonna be prepared for this book.
Yeah. I feel like I'll read like the second half of Rhythm of War before I pick up Stormlight 5 for the podcast, just to make sure I understand where all the ending points are for characters. We have a Jasnah point of view chapter, which before now, I think you could have counted Jasnah point of view chapters on one hand. This is not a common occurrence, and to get this as a preview chapter is pretty cool. There is some redacted content that I'm interested to get some guesses for you guys on, or from you guys on what that's about. But before we get into all that, let's roll intro. Okay. So for me personally, there were two big things. This is not a long chapter. There are two big things that I pulled out of this chapter. One is some interesting internal dialogue from Jasnah. And two, obviously, is the actions and dialogue of Wit in the second half. So which one do you guys want to talk about first?
Let's talk about Jasnah because I
Okay.
feel like it has a slightly lower scale of
Right. The stakes are lower.
like we're more zoomed in. Yeah.
Okay. So there's a couple quotes that I want to read you guys from this excerpt chapter. And I just want to get your guys' reaction to it and see if you're reacting as strongly as I did to these quotes. Jasnah is debating in her head of Dalinar's chosen himself for the champion, but what if I really showed what I could do? I could be the champion. And she has this to say to herself. Instead of hiding what she was, what if she'd gone out in the open, told people what she was, what she could do, what she feared? Her life and Dalinar's life seemed to be very different things. He'd burned a city in the open, and people had forgave him. Yet when Jasnah had been honest about what she feared, what she believed, what she'd discovered, well, condemnation and judgment had chased her like twin headsmen, each looking to get a whipping in before the final execution. She'd barely stayed ahead of them. because when Jasnah Kholin spoke her mind, people hated her. Perhaps she had learned the wrong lessons from that. But could she be blamed?
When I read that, I had to remind myself, like, wait, isn't this book supposed to be about Zeth? I feel like we're digging into Yasna's internal conflict and her backstory, and oh man, this was again another one of those moments where it was like, this book is going to be about everything, isn't it?
Yeah. If we're covering or even hinting at topics like this, I feel like the amount of ground that Stormlight 5 has to cover, because there are certain like ground rules and promises that Stormlight 5 has to deliver on, like, the contest of champions and Zeth back flashbacks, and there's some other stuff in there too. Um, but if we're spending time on peeling back some of Yasna's point of view, maybe we're just setting it up for later, like in the back 5, like, which we probably are. He's still giving you page time, which is interesting. So there's a really good description here. Condemnation and judgment had chased her like twin headsmen, each looking to get a whipping in before the final execution. I wonder if that sets up Yasna like going on tour, if you will, to the different libraries, which is where we find her at the beginning of the Way of Kings. So if you remember, Shallan is chasing Yasna like from capital to capital, and Yasna is doing research on the Voidbringers, quote unquote, and the final desolation and whatever she can discover. So I wonder if Yasna leaving is actually more of a like forced out thing as opposed to a leaving to go seek out knowledge. I wonder if she's more of a outcast from her family than we originally thought, and I wonder if Gavilar has something to do with that. And then when Gavilar, no, she's there at the she's there in the prologue, isn't she, when Gavilar dies?
Yes.
Well, yeah, she's in our second point of view. She's point of view in Words of Radiance.
Yeah.
So I guess it's not Gavilar that would be kicking her out, because he'd be dead.
Yeah.
So I wonder if somebody else is forcing her out of the family at the time of the Way of Kings.
So I was obviously I instantly started to wonder what is it? What is in her past? What could it be?
Right.
And the way she alludes to it and compares it to what Dalinar had done, I'm curious to know if y'all think this is right. The way she compares it makes it sound like it's something that she did that was just really that was really abhorrent, not necessarily something that like I don't know, like it's probably not the same thing as like the thrill or whatever. Maybe it was, but something like that was just really bad. Not necessarily like I feel like Shallan, it was almost more so what was happening to her, and I feel like it was with Jasnah. It sounds more so like something that she did or was a part of or saw or whatever, that whatever she talks about, she's being berated. She's being like kind of completely torn apart, right? So I don't know what to make of it, because my understanding is she's pretty young, right?
She's
And I mean that doesn't necessarily mean
Youngish.
that's
she's
like I'm thinking like
she's
sorry,
30.
go ahead, Char.
She's 34 when the Way of Kings
Okay.
opens. If that gives you a good
Okay.
age.
And the like the flashbacks to Gavilar's, because for some reason I don't. This is probably just wrong. Whenever I think of our like the prologue of Words of Radiance, I think of her as being like fairly young, like 17, 18. I'm probably not right. She's probably a little older than that, more like
It's 6 years.
25 or something. Okay, so I was just wrong. I'm thinking it's like 11 years or something like that.
Yeah, it's 6 years that they're on but between the prologue and the chapter 1 of the Way of Kings. So, yeah, she's what, 28, 27, something like that, when Gavilar dies.
Yes, yeah. About there.
So you
Okay.
guys, I want to get your thoughts. She's referring to this condemnation and judgment, this rejection of her, where Dalinar gets forgiveness. Did you feel like she was referring to something that we don't know about, or is she simply just referring to like her religious hypocrisy, where she's denied the church and said that, oh yeah, there's that the god you worship is dead. Is that what you guys think she's referring to here?
I think both. I think because so at the time when Shallan meets her in the Way of Kings, like the chapter 3 of the Way of Kings, chapter 4, um, that's one of the first things that's mentioned about Jasnah is she is not in the Vorin church, she's a heretic, she's an atheist. And I wonder
Mhm.
if Jasnah discovering something maybe with Ivory, or something along those lines would then lead her to denouncing the Vorin religion, and then her getting cast out and condemned for that. So I wonder if they're connected, and the same event. But I have no idea what that is. I don't know what
Yeah.
interacting with Ivory and maybe accidentally summoning a shard blade or something. I don't know why that would then lead you to Vorinism is wrong. I'm going to publicly announce that. I don't know. There's a key actor in there that I don't know. I don't have a clue.
Right. Right. And you used the correct word there. Heresy is what I meant, not hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is Dalinar's thing.
Right.
Heresy.
Yeah. The heretic, I think she's called in,
Yeah.
like, capitalized, like that's a title.
Yeah.
I want to read the next one as well. Another quick excerpt. Trembling there, she realized finally why she hated this mattress so much. It reminded her of the soft restraints they'd given her when she'd been young, when those who loved her had taken away her own freedom for her own good. Those terrible months that basically everyone had forgotten about as an anomaly, except by Jasnah, who would never forget.
As soon as I read that, I was like, oh, hints, more hints. We've had like one-liners or even like two words buried in a sentence
Yeah,
before in a couple of different places. I don't remember exactly where, but I remember keying in on them as we read through. I want to say they started showing up in like Oathbringer, maybe earlier even, but like references to, and if that dark secret ever surfaced again, and then they move on. Like, hang on a second, like
Yeah.
we've had a couple of these now from Yasna has some kind of dark secret in her past. Like this is another one of those. This time that was slightly more detail, soft restraints. Like I'm thinking padded room. It's
right.
like they've put her in a padded room. They locked her up for some reason because she was going crazy.
Ooh, theory time. I wonder if young Jasnah. So a quick scene from Dalinar point of view in Oathbringer. Do you remember a scene towards the end of the book where Dalinar is trying to cope with his loss of Evie, turns to alcohol, and he's out of alcohol, so he's like going crazy and like rummaging through the halls looking for anything, and he finds Jasnah in the study, and they read the Way of Kings all night. They read it from start to finish. Do you guys remember this scene?
Yes.
Yep.
I wonder if Jasnah, at a young age, discovers Ivory and jumps to the wrong conclusion that she's a Voidbringer because she's interested in like Voidbringers and the Recreants and the hierarchy and all those like historical stuff. I wonder if she like summons Ivory as like a black, like dark, luminescent shard blade, and then like freaks out and starts, I don't know, like self harm or something, which would lead to the restraints. I wonder if there's some incorrect conclusion that young Jasnah comes to, where then everybody that she's close to then what she's just saying here, that her loved ones had taken away her own freedom for her own good. Those terrible months that basically everyone had forgotten about as an anomaly except for her. So obviously that's going to do some trauma, even if it is for Jasnah's own good, even if she was going to do something reckless or terrible or whatever.
Yeah, that seems to be a plausible way to put the pieces together. I definitely follow it.
Which I guess the way you could interpret it as she makes the correct conclusion that she's a Voidbringer, and then because the humans are the Void, and all that. But
Right.
yes,
I want
I don't think we're going to be getting that a lot more of this in Stormlight 5. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wait till Jasnah POV, which is a ways away, unfortunately. But
I I'm not so sure. This chapter alone, this excerpt of a chapter that we've gotten goes fairly deep into Yasna's doubts and things like that. I feel like I'd be a little surprised if this is all we get. Like you were saying at the beginning, we're clearly getting some page time for Yasna. That's got to go somewhere. Surely we're going to see this a couple of times. I feel like maybe we could explore this.
unless this is an interlude,
Mm,
If
maybe.
if this isn't, I'm actually I kind of agree with Elliot. I think him bringing this up here, wherever this is in the book, I think there will at least be some further mention of it. We will either just simply find out what it is, or it may go deeper. It may be whatever. Because okay, so back to she mentions like, oh, if they knew what I could do, then maybe I could be Dalinar's champion. That's kind of what she's alluding to.
right?
Maybe we find out what it is, but we don't necessarily like see it, if that makes sense. And maybe it's like a later book thing whenever that really is implemented further. But I feel like him mentioning it here, I mean, I feel like we'll find out because it's book 5. Um, but
And
I mean,
and
I could be wrong.
think about Rhythm of War as well, where Venli is our stated like character, and we spend flashbacks in her point of view, but we get significant chunks of Navani's storyline,
Right.
where we're spending quite a bit of time exploring her character and not Venli. I could see Brandon continuing that, or even attempting to go like even more characters where Zeth is our stated flashback character, but that we get significant chunks of Yasna, or we get significant chunks of Renarin or somebody else like along with Zeth.
Right. Okay. Anything else on? Well, actually, I'll do a nice segue from Jasnah to Wit with this quote from Jasnah about Wit. Jasnah says to herself, Wit would do what he thought was best for people, not do what they wanted from him. Which is, I think, a nice way to sum up how Hoyd is going to approach not only Stormlight 5, but any story going forward. That just because character A wants this problem to be solved doesn't mean he's necessarily going to do it because he sees a bigger picture. And maybe solving this problem isn't what the Cosmere needs, for example. So if Wit had shown up in the Way of Kings and rescued Kaladin from the bridge crews, like Kaladin wanted, that like he certainly could have done that, but then we wouldn't have had our fourth ideal Windrunner by the end of Rhythm of War. So there's an interesting dynamic between character A, who knows so much more than everybody else, and how he decides to help.
And that feels very consistent with the Hoyd we've seen so far as well, in my mind. Because think about the his classic therapy sessions. He's not there to tell characters what they want to hear. He's there to tell them what they need to hear in that moment.
Right.
And it's like I feel like that's a thing we really like about Wit and Hoyd up until now. He's that step in and give the guidance when it's needed kind of character. This scene is just very different because now Jasnah and Wit are in a relationship, and taking that same approach of nope, sorry, I'm just gonna give you the information you need to know. That that doesn't work very well in a relationship
Right.
to decide, nope, sorry, you don't need to know that right now. Stop asking me about it.
And
I
and that's the truth that Jasnah comes to in this scene. She
Yeah,
says, I think I'm gonna have to start backing out of this because I can't trust him, and that's really important for me.
which I think is a perfectly logical conclusion. It's Yasna, of course, it's logical, right? It's she is not as crazy, smart, and powerful. She is not on his level
Right.
in terms of like the circles that they move in and the larger goals that they have. I think the conclusion she comes to is probably the exact correct one in that, like you just said, Trevor, Hoyt is going to act for the good of the Cosmere. That's the level of, thinking that he's on. He's gonna have conversations with Odium and is going to be the person who's going across, planets and seeking out different people and things like that. That's not Yasna. Yasna is the problem solver. She's the, sit down and figure it out and solve the problem. There's always going to be a clash
She
there.
she's the queen of Kolinar, so there's a obvious clash of perspective and what's the word I'm looking for?
Objective? Purpose?
It'll come to me later.
Job title?
Prioritization. Priorities. That's what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Elliot, you have this in the outline. This is from. Well, we're still in Yasna's head, obviously, but Yasna's mentioned something about like Wit being active while he sleeps, or not actually sleeping, or she's got some weird internal dialogue about Wit and what he does while he sleeps. Do you guys want to
Let
bring this
me
up?
let, yeah, let me read it to you actually, the quote in the chapter. Was he even actually asleep? Things he'd said to her indicated that perhaps he went to other places at night around the Cosmere, visiting other worlds, engaging in political machinations? I don't even know how to say that word. At which, even still, she could only guess. And like very mild Yumi and the Nightmare Painter spoilers here.
Yeah.
I read that and I was like, wait a second. Like Yumi and Painter style travel in your sleep kind of thing?
Right.
Like, wait a second.
Well, and different minor Yumi and Nightmare Painter spoilers. I wonder if that could feasibly put that book in a different in a different spot in the timeline than we originally thought.
Hmm.
If there's like some weird time dilation stuff going on or something.
I have to think about that. I almost don't want to explore it here because then we get into like major spoilers for that book, which we probably don't want to do here. But
Right.
yeah, interesting. Interesting. There was one other thought that came to my mind, though, that would explain this. Later on in this chapter, which we're going to talk about in a second, Boyd reveals his whole thing about memories and
Yeah.
how he's cataloging and storing his memories outside of himself because he has to, because he's lived for so long and you can't handle that many memories in your brain. So you have to do you have to store it outside of yourself. He he explains a little bit to Yasna that something along the lines of I have to periodically review my memories. And it almost seemed like he was implying that that's what he was just doing in that moment. Like I'm almost thinking instead of sleeping.
Oh,
Like
interesting.
he's not sleeping. He's just delving into his breath stored memories, and it kind of looks like sleeping to someone else, but he's just kind of in a trance because he's in his memories, and then he comes out of the memories maybe and talks to Jasnah about them. Jasnah thinks he's talking about actual events he just like went and did on another planet, when in reality he's just talking about his memories. He's just talking about the memory he was in, where he was on whatever planet doing whatever things.
That's kind of a neat idea I hadn't thought about, Elliot. Like, I mean, you could interpret that as, yes, he is kind of traveling. I mean, he's like traveling through his memories. He's thinking about these other worlds he's been to and things like that, other people he's been around. As far as him like keeping track of all that, I would guess that, maybe when he sleeps he has vivid dreams or memories of places he's been. But it feels like this whole like ordering of his thoughts, ordering of his memory is what he did when he woke up. Is him like he starts writing in some kind of
Yeah.
foreign language that Jasnah can't recognize. Right. And he spends a lot of time like very vigorously writing, trying to jot all this stuff down, and then he's like, there's 3 minutes and some seconds gone or whatever, and he's like, what's the deal with this? And all the things like that. So I feel like that may be more so what he is doing with his like ordering his memory or things like that.
I really like that idea that he's more meditating and reviewing the footage as opposed to sleeping. But I also wonder if Boyd. So I'm gonna go down a couple hypotheticals and then arrive to a conclusion here. So try to stay with me. I wonder if Hoyd has his physical body has limitations, and he knows that, so Hoyd has to sleep. But his cognitive ability doesn't stop, and so maybe he could travel in Shadesmar while he's asleep. His cognitive self could travel in Shadesmar while he's asleep, maybe. And then I don't know. Like, we've seen some Knights Radiant do what you could basically call teleportation. And he could jump from maybe to a planet that he has a connection to, that he's been to before or something.
I would believe it because, again, kind of drawing on Yumi, which we just read, Yumi and Painter are sort of traveling in their sleep, and it doesn't seem to have like massively negative effects on their bodies. Like,
Right.
it seems like their bodies still sleep, and their mind can go wander and go
Right.
do something that's, again, based on connection, like you just said. Interesting.
Yeah. A couple different things that could be happening here. I do think this might be the first time that Boyd doesn't know something that the reader does. I think that is a very interesting dynamic, that we know more than Hoyd does in this scene, I think for the first time, and Hoyd knows way more than we do all the time. So the fact that he's throwing down white sand and checking his bag basically for all of his different magic systems, like real quick. There's quite a bit in that one paragraph that you're like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, I don't know what that is. Oh, I know what that is. Like, it's pretty funny. But yeah, he's missing what, 3 minutes and 20 some seconds? Is that what he said?
Yeah, something around there. So, yeah, our understanding is, yeah, that's what Odium took, and what I okay, when I started, he started to talk about Odium a little bit. And this is when I really was zoning in. I was like, oh my goodness, what is he going to say? What has he figured out? Because a big question we had after Rhythm of War was, is Hoyd going to be like a non-factor now? Is he not going to be aware of what happened? Is what was like probably our best tool of knowledge just about against Odium? Now, is that not the case? But he talks about how he knows Reyes so well. He refers to him as a megalomaniac and just
Yes,
someone
he
who would
does.
never, he could never. So Hoyd realizes that his memory was kind of shifted or altered, to think he came away from his discussion with Odium.
What he thinks is Ray's.
Yes, his discussion with Odium as like having won, like effectively having won, having kind of tricked Odium or something like that, or he at least has the feelings of satisfaction of that, and he realizes that Rays would never do that, even if like he is too arrogant, he's too much of a megalomaniac. That even if like he would never use that as a trick. He would never use a trick to like let Wit think he got an edge.
Right.
And so I was really hoping that he might come to the conclusion that maybe this isn't Ray's, but he doesn't. Because he's like, I was there. It is Ray's. Is how he's thinking through it, I guess, right? He's like, I guess Ray's has kind of like improved, adapted, grown, kind of from this. And anyways, I was really zoned in on that part, and I was curious to see what he drew from that. And that's when he's like, we need to look at the agreement, because he understands Odium is apparently wittier now, or something's different. So
Right. I should have gone back and looked at the agreement like they do in this scene. I didn't, but I should. Something that I discussed in my Stormlight key scenes video that I filmed on my own, right after we finished Rhythm of War. I really highly elevated Zeth killing Rays and Odie and the dirty tricks, the scene that he's talking about in this chapter where Todium tricks Void, because just as a writing mechanics standpoint, going into Stormlight 5, had that scene not happened, feels like the stakes are fairly low because we've already beaten Rays at least once at the end of Oathbringer. Rays has already been defeated as Odium. Dalinar was able to defeat him even temporarily, but we know it was possible. Now that right at the end of Rhythm of War, he flips the switch and now Teravangian is Odium, that makes such a new dynamic moving into the contest, the final chapter of our first Stormlight 5 book, or our first 5 Stormlight books, that it's so well done that you can raise the stakes simply by swapping characters like that. Now it's Teravangian is such a wild card. Now I think it's interesting that Hoyd now knows that something is amiss, but he doesn't know what it is now confirms that he was indeed actually tricked. Because we had that a little bit of a question at the end of Rhythm of War, was what actually happened here. Does Hoyd actually know what was going on or not? It's confirmed that no, Hoyd certainly was actually tricked here by Teravangian. So again, raising the stakes for Stormlight 5. That's been now confirmed for us, that now Hoyd doesn't even know what's going on. So even if Hoyd sits us by the fire and tells us you will be warm again, Kaladin, that may not even be true, because Hoyd doesn't hold all the cards anymore.
On the other side of the same coin, though, I'm totally with you. Totally with everything you just said. The one part that I think is encouraging me slightly is that Hoyd at least knows something is going on.
Right.
He no longer knows the exact specifics of what is going on, but he's at least now going to be on his guard. Based on this scene we just saw, like, he's rattled. We've never seen Hoyd like blink or miss a beat or anything, and he is like full on panicking in this scene. At least he knows to be more careful. At least he is going to be at least a little bit on the lookout. Is that way, like you said a second ago, Paul, we're not going to completely count out Hoyd, but yes, he doesn't know everything anymore.
Who do you guys think is Wit's old friend that he is going to contract? Or is it a misspelling of contact? It says contract in the also it's a misspelling on the Words of Brandon website, but Jasnah calls Dalinar a Bond Sith. So there's your headcanon for the Star Wars crossover fans out there.
Wow. Yeah, there we go.
But anyway,
Tatooine is in the Cosmere.
there you go. Yep.
Anyways.
The very last line is, on your planet, I only know of one person, but we're not on speaking terms. But I have another old friend who I can contract. I'm curious if that is a typo to contact, or if there's actually a contract here.
I don't know. I want to say that's a typo, but at the exact same time, contract is still the key word here,
Right.
even if that is a typo, because the conversation directly before this was, quick, get out the contract. Oh, this is beyond my expertise. I need an expert in these kinds of things. And so whether that's the correct verb or not, if he's contracting or contacting, it's still about a contract. So
it's a very unfortunate typo, because either word
yeah,
has big meaning.
We're gonna time travel here a little bit. You guys ready for this?
Ready?
We're gonna time travel.
Cosmere,
Okay.
no, but go ahead.
I know that's not okay for Cosmere. I'm gonna travel forward in time a week here and reference something we have not talked about on this podcast yet, but I have read,
Okay.
and I know this is terrible, but I read this chapter and I had no idea who this friend might be who would be an expert in contracts. Then I went and read our
Ooh.
chapters for the part 1 of The Well of Ascension, Mistborn 2, that we're covering a week from now, hence the time travel. And there's a character in that book who is an expert in contracts. And that's the Khandra.
Yeah.
Everything is about the contract.
Oh.
And so when I first read that line, I was like, well, I have no idea who Hoyd knows. But then a few days later, I was like, oh, wait a second. Maybe Hoyd knows a Khandra, because apparently their entire life revolves around contracts and things of that sort. So now I do have a theory. I think Wit might be going to contact a Khandra about a contract.
Say that 10 times fast. Contact a Khandra
not
about a
do that.
contract.
And if we want to spin theories even wilder here, he says, I do have a friend on this planet who knows about such things, but she is not on speaking terms with me.
Right.
We know, words of Brandon, right? He's told us there is a Khandra on Roshar.
Correct. There's exactly one.
So you could try and connect some tenuous lines between all of those dots on
Yeah,
your
but he's not
chalkboard.
on good speaking terms with that one. So
Right.
Correct.
don't forget about that.
But
What were your guys' thoughts though on
So-
who this person?
so I assumed that the female that in question here, who is not on speaking terms with Wit, is cultivation. I assume I made that pretty quick assumption. Now that it's an assumption, and I definitely could be wrong. And then I really do like what you just brought up. There is a Khandra on Roshar, confirmed by Brandon. And what you said was absolutely true. Khandra's entire lives are built around contracts. So we could be seeing a Khandra show up in Stormlight 5 completely feasibly. I mean, he's not holding back anymore with crossing his magic systems in different books. I think it's fair to say. So having a Khandra show up and talk to Hoyd, maybe on the front half of Stormlight 5, completely valid theory, I think.
So I have a so my first thoughts on who this would be actually. So I was thinking of it as contact for the record over contract.
Okay.
If it is if we are scrutinizing that word, then that would change a lot of how I think about it or who I think he's gonna contact. I would actually agree it might be a Condra. That's like they seem to be the experts on contracts and what you can and can't do and stuff like that. But my initial thoughts were, well, actually, I think I'm answering this as I go because I think he's already gotten declined. I was thinking of Frost. That was the name, right?
I also thought of
There's
Frost as an old friend. Yep.
Yes, the old friend Frost, which we've seen in epigraphs.
Yep.
And I this isn't very helpful, but I have another guess, but I don't think I can say who it is.
For
It's
Mistborn spoilers?
spoiler.
Or
Yes,
okay,
yeah.
I understand.
So I don't think I can say it yet, but we'll be there before long.
I do think we'll be there before long. Yes, Frost definitely crossed my mind. Because in the epigraph way back in this is more Stormlight confined. And we're not getting too crazy with our theories. Back in Words of Radiance, when Frost and Void are writing to each other back and forth, part of the letter from Frost to Hoyd is, you promised in writing not to get involved, and you're still getting involved. So there is some sort of pact there for Cosmere where people to stay away from Roshar. So that could easily be an answer, and we could have an ice dragon show up at the end of Stormlight 5. That'd be pretty cool. But do I think it's going there? No. Feasibly, sure. There's plenty of things that I could feasibly see happening that I don't see happening that actually do turn out to happen. So I like all these. Or it could just be Kaladin. You could just be writing to Kaladin.
Hey, Cal. I know you've retired and all.
Right. Anything else from this chapter, gentlemen?
Okay, so I do actually have a little else. I'm starting to run with the ball a little more on who he might be contacting.
Okay.
And so I side note, I was really impressed or really surprised with how much information we got on breaths in this. It was just direct, like it is breaths, that is how you do it, which we understood fairly well, but laid out very clearly that that's how it is all done, right? Is it possible that it's someone from that's Nalthis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or is Nalthis Mistborn?
Nalthis is Warbreaker.
Okay, someone from Nalthis. In my head, I don't know. In my head, I was wondering. So oh gosh, what's the name of the guy in? Is it the God King? Is that what they call him? Sisebron? Yeah.
Is Sisebron showing up in Stormlight 5? Is that what you're about to tell me?
Potentially, or with the sheer amount of breaths he has, is there some because. Okay, the reason I'm connecting this, I'm going to provide a little more information. Whenever we see at the end of Rhythm of War, whenever we see us, the reader, recognizes that Hoyd's breaths or memory has been taken because of things like he's off pitch and things like that. Is some like I would actually be I'm guessing that Sisebron has more breaths specifically than Wit does. And I wonder if there's something specific with that he could somehow know. My understanding is Sisebron still can't really communicate that well. I don't actually know where we are now. But I could honestly believe something like that, even though that's probably more far-fetched than other guesses. That wouldn't be my first guess, but I'm just kind of thinking about it now since we've gotten direct correlations between Nalthis and Roshar and
Right.
And breaths and everything here. So yeah, so that's something that I was thinking about.
I wonder if Zyle could help him recover his breaths and recover the missing 3 minutes.
That is. I don't know how that would work. Mechanically, I
Right.
don't know if that's possible. Or what? I don't know if you could recover them other than
I'm assuming that Todium took them and has them.
Yeah, I would assume the same, but I don't know.
Or chucked them out the window or something like that. They physically left Hoyd and went with Odium.
Right.
You have to track down where they went.
He didn't just put them in the recycle bin. He actually deleted them.
Well, he might have put them in the recycle bin. He might have left them somewhere, but he physically removed them from Hoyd, took them somewhere, or kept them, or has them. Getting them back involves interacting with Odium and asking nicely, or fighting, or something.
Right. The only reason why I brought up Xyle is because I'm just frustrated that we have not had a Xyle Nightblood reunion yet. And we're entering book 5 of Stormlight. I mean, the last time they talked was 2011, and it's gonna be 2024 before they even have a chance to talk again. They were literally within a mile of each other in Stormlight 4, and didn't talk. That really bothered me. Anything else?
That's all I have.
Very nice Stormlight 5 preview chapter. I really enjoyed these. Thank you, Mr. Sanderson. We will reconvene next week with the entirety of part 1 of the Well of Ascension. Thanks for joining me, Paul Elliott.
I'm excited for more.
can't wait.